You're listening to Tony Graham on Binjang 91.5, and now it's time for our talk with Matthew Dickerson, the council report, because Matthew, of course, is our mayor of the Dubbo Regional Council. So good morning, Matthew.
Yeah, good morning, Tony. It was great to be in Wellington for our last council meeting. It's actually really nice when you have council meetings on a regular basis in Wellington and residents come along and participate in the meetings. And so, yeah, I actually find it quite nice.
It's a big plus. It's really important that council's plugged into the community and we're plugged into them.
Yeah, well, I've actually been in Wellington a fair bit over the last couple of weeks. We had the flag raising ceremony, of course, for NAIDOC Week. We've had, still in NAIDOC Week today, actually, the last day of NAIDOC Week. We had the opening of the cafe where the old Binjang Radio station used to be in that cafe. So that's the Malayan Cafe and the Cultural Centre, which not a lot in the Cultural Centre yet, but that'll hopefully start to improve. And, of course, it was only a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, sorry, we had the Community Leaders Breakfast there, the opening of the pedestrian bridge, which was all very exciting. I mean, I was amazed at how many people turned up for that. That was fantastic. Over 100 people there for the opening of the pedestrian bridge. And, of course, the Wellington meeting. And I've had some meetings down there as well. So, no, it's been very busy in Wellington over the last week or two.
And I might add, the Malayan Cafe official opening is for the public is on today.
Well, it was kind of a soft opening they had the other day, and the cafe was there serving coffees, so it was open and running. But they're doing the official opening today.
Yeah, it's fantastic. All right, Matthew. Well, look, there's a number of different issues that I've been able to see from the papers you sent me. Thank you very much this morning. But is there anything specifically you'd like to talk about first?
Oh, look, I'm pretty excited about a few things out of there, Tony. I think the transition to zero emissions in the fleet, I think that's a thing that's been coming for a long period of time. So I think that's pretty exciting. Obviously, the lighting audit of Cameron Park, I'd love to see Cameron Park used more and potentially the bridge there, so doing a lighting audit. So I think that's a really interesting one, an exciting one there. And I think really just overall, things are happening, things are progressing. We'd love it to be happening faster, but things are ticking away and they're all happening.
Yeah, okay. Now, one thing that caught my eye in the report from the meeting was the Financial Assistance Policy Review, and it seems to be that it's going to be replaced with a community venue hire program, but I haven't had enough time to analyse this. So you might like to just explain what's happening with that.
Yeah, this is the financial assistance that we give out to various organisations that make application for that. And this was just a minor change in the policy. Now, one of the things that used to happen in the past is that the CEO or GM in the old days used to have a sponsorship fund. So it was basically like a small amount of money. I think the budget allocation for that was approximately $10,000 a year. And the way the CEO or GM would normally use that fund would be if, for example, there was a community group hiring a hall and it was going to just detract from their profits to have to pay the higher fee for a council hall. So the CEO would say, well, rather than try and discuss that higher fee with the manager of that hall and the manager of that hall is trying to meet their budgets, the CEO would use their discretionary fund to say, well, we'll cover the cost of that venue hire, for example. And it seemed like a fairly ad hoc way to go about trying to make things a bit better in the community. So the idea of this policy change was that effectively the CEO's sponsorship fund has been removed. And the idea here is that let's put probably a more transparent process in place. And so that if someone does want to hire a hall and has got some sort of community program where it seems unfair they should pay for it, then let's have a program where people can make application to that community venue hire, and here are the rules associated with that. So it was really only a small change in that financial assistance policy, and so it was really just to tidy that up, make it a little bit more transparent, make it a little bit better. We've already implemented something different with the Mayor's discretionary fund. Most people aren't aware that the Mayor has a discretionary fund as well. But in the past, the process for the last council, if you like, the process was that the Mayor of the day had the ability to give funds to any organisation, any group, and there didn't seem to be any checks or balances in that process at all. And I actually felt quite uncomfortable with that. I just thought that seems like there is potential there, and I'm not suggesting this has happened, but there's a potential there for someone to misuse that particular fund. Now, the idea of that fund is to try and fund things that need to be funded very quickly that haven't got time to go through a normal process with a council meeting. So I understand the need for that in certain circumstances. What we've actually changed, discussion between the CEO and myself, we've actually changed that policy now so that the Mayor still has a discretionary fund, but it's got to be reported to council everywhere that discretionary fund has been used, and that report goes through on a quarterly basis. So if the mayor of the day misuses those funds, he or she can still get away with misusing them, but it's going to come to light when they have to put that report through, and councillors can start to ask questions, the public can start to ask questions. Why did you fund your next door neighbour for $5,000 for something? I'm making that up, obviously. There's no evidence that that's happened. But again, just putting these steps in place to make sure that things that are happening are done in a much more open, transparent way. Again, when I looked at that, and I actually had a bit of a look at how that fund might have been used over the last couple of years, I felt a little bit uncomfortable about that fund being in that same makeup, that same form when I came along as mayor. I didn't want it to be seen that I could be abusing the system in that way. So that's where the mayor, the GM and myself, or the CEO and myself, had that discussion and changed the way that process works.
Yeah. Look, I think from what I hear in the community, a lot of people will welcome that. And the other thing is, in the last council where they doubled the price of these venues, it put a lot of pressure on community organisations, and not just with the hall either, but even the use of Cameron Park, and that's put a damper on these activities. So having a mechanism there that sort of can alleviate that situation, I think is helpful. And also, the other thing I hear from the community is there's just so much red tape in trying to get anything done now since the amalgamation. So we're talking about processes here and making it easy and I suppose a smooth operation to be able to organise things would be, I think, another thing would be appreciated if that sort of was attended to as well from a community perspective. So it might be something you'd like to take on board, because that's something that I hear very often.
Yeah, no, look, I hear that. And it is a fine line, trying to get to the stage where there is a process, there is some paperwork. It's not just someone looking after someone's friend, etc. And again, I'm not saying that this is happening, but you always want to create a process that you think is able to withstand the rigour of someone being there that is less than honest. So having those processes in place while still making it easy. So we don't want to get the situation where Billy Bloggs has got the keys and he just hands it to whoever he knows and they come and ask for the keys and there you go. But you don't want to make it so that you've got to fill in 28 pages of a document and have 6 months notice before you can get the keys. So you've got to have a balance in there. Yeah. Is the balance right at the moment? Probably not. We've just got to keep working on that.
Yeah, very good. Okay, Matthew. Well, I know you're kind of running out of time today, but is there anything else you'd like to mention before we go? I know there was a few other things like the adoption of the standing committee reports, and it's centred around sporting fields, for example, passive open space, which could be an issue coming up for Wellington in relation to Market Square. But it talks about that, but I wasn't quite sure if there was any focus on Wellington there.
Well, I'll pick a couple of those things, if you like, that I mentioned briefly at the beginning. So there was a notice of motion there to have a look at the lighting in Cameron Park. So Councillor Jess Goff moved that notice of motion, well supported by councillors. The idea there is to look at the lighting that's there at the moment, then see if there's ways that we can put additional lighting in, including the new pedestrian bridge, which I think that will be really popular, that pedestrian bridge. We would like people to use Cameron Park, use that link across to Pioneer Park, take advantage of that, but maybe use it at night time as well, use it late evening, early mornings, and people might want to get out and go for a walk or maybe go for a run, and just making it safer for people. So there's no suggestion there at this stage that we'll put any extra lighting in. It's really step one, do a lighting audit, and then from that, let's see how we can investigate that going further. So I think that's a good positive thing. And now that we've got that, I'd love to see, for example, there has been a course marked out for a park run in Wellington that hasn't started yet, but using that new pedestrian bridge in a new course they could mark out, I think it would be really exciting as well. And if I may, with your indulgence, maybe just mention that transition to zero emissions fleet that I talked about. It really goes back, I think it was about 2005, so 17 years ago, that I first brought forward the idea to council of having hybrid vehicles in our fleet. At the time, I owned a Toyota Prius, which was a very early hybrid vehicle, and I thought it would be a good idea to actually look at some hybrid vehicles in the fleet of council. Now, Steve Colliver was, I'm sure, the fleet manager back then. He's been there for a while now. He's a very good fleet manager at the moment. I'm sure it was Steve Colliver back then as well, and maybe some other staff that I dealt with. But I couldn't get that idea up amongst my fellow councillors. And again, it was based on the fact that maybe they were more expensive, even though they were doing some good for the environment. we've gotten to the point now, and I've been working on it now since my first electric vehicles back when I was mayor previously, and I've really got this idea that surely we can get the staff to start to change their cars over, but I don't want to cost the community more money. So Steve Colliver's done an excellent report. He gathered a whole range of information from a whole range of different sources about the resale value of cars, the cost of running cars, the total cost of ownership. So he put a report to council, which has been approved by council, but it will go on public display for 28 days, or a minimum of 28 days. So then it'll come back for final adoption by council. But in that report, it shows quite clearly, with all the data that's been gathered by Steve Colliver, it shows quite clearly that despite the fact that electric vehicles are dearer up front, if you look at the 4-year total cost of ownership, and again, there's a few variables in there and comparisons to make, but generally you get to the stage where equivalent vehicles are actually cheaper with electric vehicles. So the idea of this policy is to give the staff the choice, which they haven't had in the past, to actually choose an electric vehicle over a petrol vehicle, again with that rider, and the resolution of council said exactly this, that the purchase and the total cost of ownership over that time frame is not more expensive. So we don't want to cost the ratepayers more money. In fact, we want to save the money whilst also doing some good for the environment. And I think this report shows that we can actually deliver both. So that's pretty exciting. And once that goes on public display and hopefully it comes back and is formally adopted by council, then that'll give those staff members who are interested the opportunity to do that. And I think we'll see more vehicles in Dubbo and Wellington owned by the staff or driven by the staff being electric vehicles in the future as a result of this policy.
Yeah, I've seen some figures now. Just recently a report came out that after 2 years, the cost of running these two different types of cars, you reach an equivalence, and after that, the EVs start getting cheaper. So that's interesting. And I must congratulate you for driving a Prius. I mean, that was the equivalent in the ICE vehicle world of driving a Trabant. So, you got any bones left? They must have been shaken to death driving that thing.
No, I didn't mind the Prius, actually. So I've had a couple of hybrids. I've had a Prius hybrid, I've had a Camry hybrid, and I've had a Lexus hybrid, and I didn't mind them. My big point at the moment is that we've probably moved past hybrid. In 2005, hybrids were very new, revolutionary, at the leading edge. 2022, I think the technology's progressed far enough, and let's face it, the runs are on the board. We're seeing a lot being sold out there at the moment in EV land. So I think it's moved past the hybrid vehicles now. But for some, that is still a valid solution. The plug-in hybrid still might be a valid solution for some people.
Yeah, well, I think in the next 2 years we're going to see a massive change to the motor vehicle market with EVs, if indications are any thing to go by as to the output coming from some of those factories.
And we want
producing EVs.
We want Dubbo Regional Council to be at the forefront of that. We don't want to be lagging behind. We want to be leading the charge. And I think that having the mayor's vehicle, the deputy mayor's vehicle, who, again, we both bought those ourselves, but having those as electric vehicles, having staff vehicles, electric vehicles, there is no doubt about it, that will have some positive influence in the community, especially when the community reads that report that Steve Colliver put together. Some people may have been questioning, well, it's dearer to buy an electric vehicle. I can't afford it yet. Well, when you look at that report, in a lot of circumstances, you can't afford not to have an electric vehicle, because once you start to take into account that total cost of ownership, the purchase price is only one part of it. The running costs, the petrol costs, and the resale value are major components of the cost of running a vehicle.
Certainly are. That's very, very much the case. And look, it's really important that councils keep up with the times and technology and efficiencies. And we had a discussion about that earlier. And, you got to make sure that you're up there. Otherwise, you're not going to be delivering to the community what it needs to have efficiently. And
yeah, that's right. So anyone that's vaguely interested in electric vehicles, I'd say go and get that latest business paper from our council meeting on Wednesday night and have a read through that, because that's got some really good data in there. And it was a pretty easy decision for councillors to make. There was a bit of discussion at the council meeting about that particular report, but it was a pretty easy decision for councillors to make, because it was so comprehensive, showing that total cost of ownership is actually dramatically better with electric vehicles.
Yeah. Look, I can see straight away that the Tesla Y is going to shake up the market worldwide. The ramp up of production is happening at a very rapid rate, and as you and I both know, the situation is that supply is outstripped by a very huge margin when it comes to sales. So that's an indication of where things are going.
Absolutely right.
Mm. Anyway, Matthew, it's been great talking to you today. We do this after our major council meeting, and we also normally do a report after the standing committee meetings, which happens in between council meetings. We always like to keep our locals in the loop with what's happening at council level, particularly those matters that are mostly relevant to Wellington in particular. I think it's really important to get that out there. So thanks very much for your time, Matthew.
My pleasure, Tony. Always good to be chatting to you and your listeners.
So we've been talking to Matthew Dickerson, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council.